This is the Rival Podcast. We are diving into week 7 waivers, bowl predictions, and the not so obvious lock of week 7. Let's talk about it.
You are now listening to the Rival Fantasy Sports Podcast. Let's go.
All right, let's look ahead to week 7 waivers. Remember, when it comes to waivers, there's this thing where some people get in the mind state of who do I need this week? Who do I need right now? Who's on bye? Who just got injured this past week? Who's not playing? Who do I need to fill in for? We got to sometimes look ahead, though. I understand everyone's like, hey, fantasy, it's a week to week game. Worry about the week that you're in. You got to stack those wins. Yeah, I get it. But you also have to look ahead. Whether right now, let's say, for instance, we're going into week 7. You are obviously you're looking at week 7, of course, but you also need to look at week 8, week 9, week 10, week 11, like around that range at least, because this is where you get out of the problem of I'm fighting with everybody else for the same players, right? And it also makes it so that you miss the boat sometimes if you don't do this on certain players or situations. Like right now, for instance, there's going to be people who are trying to pick up Kenyan Drake, Deon Jackson, just certain guys who like had really good weeks. And it's like we'll get into those, but just look ahead more than just this week. Get ahead of the waivers. Don't compete with everybody else with your budget or with your waiver. Where you're at on the waiver listings. But listen, don't drop the ball here. It literally could be what separates you and what stands between you and a fantasy championship. There's some people who draft well, and you're like, I don't understand what went wrong. I drafted so well, or I traded. I did some good trades. Yeah, but did you do waivers? It's like this one part of fantasy that some people just don't seem to get right, or they're not active enough in, or they're not looking far enough ahead in, and they're picking up the guy who went off last week but doesn't go off this week because they're just kind of scrambling, to fill in buys and injuries. So if you listen to last episode that we just released with me and Bruce, I mentioned 2 players who surprised me in week 6, 2 wide receivers, I should say. I said one was a waiver claim candidate and one was not for me. One I'm going to pick up on waivers, I'm going to target on waivers, and one I have zero interest in. I didn't, tell you which 2 they were as far as who was the waiver, who was the non-waiver. The 2 players were obviously Tyquan Thorton and Dante Pettis. So let's start with this. Pettis is the non-waiver claim for me. However, Thornton is, and I'm basing that off of a couple of facts here. The fact that Thornton, number one, is a talented rookie. He's in a good spot in this offense. The team trusts him. They like him. They need him. And even, if you were paying attention to mini camp and this kind of stuff, he was doing really well. So this is a guy who, they drafted, they felt good about. He was actually showing up. Now he had got injured in the beginning of the season, so that held him back. If you're in Dynasty, obviously he's already on people's teams, so that doesn't really matter. But if you're in redraft, this is a guy who you can pick up, you can trust, and they're just going to figure out different ways to use him. When it comes to Pettis, I feel like Pettis has had his window. He didn't make much of it. He's in an offense, and this is the biggest thing. He's in an offense that he operates within that doesn't have much space for his abilities to flourish. Even if he was having this career moment, it's like he has Justin Fields as a quarterback. He's got a bad O-line. The offense just doesn't throw the ball a lot. It's really hard for wide receivers to make it in this offense. So, I mean, they got Darnell Mooney. I like Darnell Mooney a lot. If I like any wide receiver for the Bears, it's Darnell Mooney. I'm not trusting a guy like Pettis. This is a guy where you pick him up now because you seen he had a good week. You're in a jam. You didn't look far enough ahead, and he's going to end up dropping you nothing next week probably. So I'm not in on that one. If you're looking for another one and Thornton's gone, Alec Pierce is another decent rookie wide receiver that's worth picking up. When it comes to these running backs, I just mentioned them a second ago, Kenyan Drake, Deon Jackson. There are 2 options to consider, although there's in situations for me that I won't have any interest in because going forward, they're going to be inconsistent as players in front of them get healthy. J.K. Dobbins, Jonathan Taylor, these kind of things. So I have no interest in this situation. Obviously, if you're in a super bad jam, and again, you're not looking ahead enough, you may end up having to pick up one of these guys. But in reality, they're not going to likely do for you what they did last week in week 6, unless they get lucky, they get carry, someone gets hurt again. But as guys like Dobbins, Gus Edwards is coming back, all these Naheem Hines, for these 2 guys and their respective teams, they're just going to lose carries and work to these guys. So you're picking up options if you go for them who are not going to be consistent and be able to give you a lot going forward, or if they do, it's hit and miss. And this is what happens when you get trapped up in the week-to-week waivers and not looking further ahead. From a tight end standpoint, Daniel Bellinger, rookie tight end for the Giants, he's looked good. A lot of us liked him coming into the season. If you're in Dynasty, he's gone. He's been picked up. He's either on someone's taxi team lineup, or they're just on their roster. But yeah, Bellinger has looked interesting, and so he's worthy of flex starts, tight end starts. If you need him going forward, they continue to trust him more and more. They're getting creative with him. He seems to be able to do a lot. So I like Bellinger as a waiver target for you at tight end if you really need one. You have to look at Rondale Moore and Robbie Anderson. Now, these are two wide receivers that you for sure should be picking up if they're available. Hollywood Brown is potentially out for the season. So these guys are obviously going to get more work because of that. Of course, Neal, what about DeAndre Hopkins? He's returning this week. Of course he is. He's going to be a little rusty, but he is going to get most of the workload in terms of he's DeAndre Hopkins. So you got to temper your expectations for these guys like Rondale Moore, Robbie Anderson. But for sure, they're going to help fill in and lighten the load, for Kyler Murray and the Cardinals. So definitely worth picking up a wide receiver if you're in a bad spot again, just depending on your situation. As far as looking ahead, right? Let me just give an example because I want to make sure I really hit this one home. I legit made a move in one of my leagues, in a redraft league. Funny enough, Deshaun Watson was he's in the free agency in this league. And that's because, number one, we only start one quarterback. Number two, people aren't looking ahead. And so I have Joe Burrow. I looked at it as, he's had up and downs. He had a great week last week in week 6. But if Deshaun Watson is there, I can't use him as a buy because Joe Burrow will have a buy before Deshaun Watson returns. But this is one of those situations where I picked him up, right? So I'm going to take the chance on Deshaun Watson. I'm going to take the flyer on Deshaun Watson. Hell, we going into the playoffs. Who knows how, Deshaun Watson is playing at that point. If he's on fire, if he's out here running in touchdowns and throwing the ball all over the place, and he's got this Browns offense rolling, he may be needed. So you may not have Joe Burrow. You may not have as good of a quarterback situation. You may have waited even longer for a quarterback. If he's someone who's available in your league, he's a guy that you're looking at, right? You're like, hey, he doesn't come back until after his suspension, but he's worthy of a pickup. You may have someone just rotting away on your bench. You may have a bench spot who's like, kind of like, never going to start the guy maybe, but I'm just hoping. Well, that's where you put Deshaun Watson. So these are the kind of things I'm talking about. You do it before everyone else is thinking about it. If you're in a league where a player is returning from suspension, Watson, Hopkins, he may be available. It's very unlikely unless you're like in a super, not a deep league, a very whatever league, and people are sleeping. Again, it happens. That's why I mention it. You never know the league size people are in that are listening, the level of competition they're playing in, whether everyone's new. So I like to mention these kind of things. Deshaun Watson, Hopkins, you definitely pick them up before everyone else does. Otherwise, you wait till it's too close, and here you are using all your fab budget or your your waiver priority trying to compete and get one of these guys, and you're just hoping for luck at that point. So those are the kind of guys you want to look ahead on waivers. So right now you're picking up waivers, you're doing waivers for week 7. Don't just think about week 7. Look ahead, see what your bye weeks are looking like, see who's getting beat up in your games, who's getting injured. Sometimes a guy gets injured in a game, finishes the game, and then ends up going on IR or missing some games still. So don't, try to get ahead of all that kind of stuff. All right, so that's it for my week 7 waivers. I think we summed it all up there pretty well. Let's jump over to bold predictions for week 7. I only have one bold prediction that I felt really strong about, so I wanted to make sure that was my bold prediction for the day. I'll see while I'm discussing that one. I'll think if I have any other ones. But the one that I definitely wanted to get to was my bold prediction highlight of the day. The highlighted player for this one is Terry McLaurin. I believe that Terry McLaurin, since Carson Wentz is out, potentially 4 to 6 weeks. Hinky's going to be in there. Heineke, however you say his name. He's in. He's a starter. He's named a starter already. I think that him and Terry McLaurin are going to have a good game. I think Terry McLaurin will have his best game of the season from a fantasy perspective with Carson Wentz out due to injury. So that's my bold prediction. Terry McLaurin has had a game this year with over 100 yards. So we're looking at over 100 yards, a touchdown, and just an overall a good game from Terry McLaurin. So my bold prediction for week 7, Terry McLaurin will have his best game of the season. You may be frustrated with him right now. You may be concerned about him right now. He may be letting you down right now in comparison to where you had drafted him or where you had hoped for. But feel good about him. Get him in your lineup. Don't get shaky. Trust the process. Trust why you drafted him. And it even gets better with Carson Wentz out potentially. So Terry McLaurin for me, bold prediction of week 7. Terry McLaurin will have his best game of the season so far from a fantasy perspective. Last thing of the day we're going to do is the not so obvious lock for week 7. Not so obvious lock of the week. For those who are not familiar, who have not listened before, not so obvious lock. It's easy to just give you locks of the week, right? To just give you guys who we feel are guaranteed to do good. We can sit here and name all the best players in the best situations and just go with it. But we mix things up here a little bit at Rival. I like to do the not so obvious lock of the week. The one caveat that we put on here is the player that we believe will get 10 plus points. So it may be a player that you're using to fill in for an injury, for a bye, maybe a guy you just need a flex. If you have multiple flex spots, it even makes more sense. But here's my not so obvious lock of the week for week 7. I mentioned him earlier in the show, and that is Rondale Moore. I mentioned him on waivers. He's also the lock of the week. Rondale Moore. Cardinals lost Hollywood Brown possibly for the season, like we discussed. Hopkins is back. Yes, I understand. It's important. It's important. It's a major impact. Hopkins is back, which I'm excited about. I love DeAndre Hopkins, but he is alone, not enough to make up for the loss of Brown in week 7. Just because I feel like he's got to get the rust off. He's back in live action. This team in general just needs targets, and Hollywood Brown's been doing pretty good this season. Actually, been really good. So Hopkins is back. He's a little bit different of a receiver than Hollywood Brown, also. So this is just an overall, I think, a good game for Rondale Moore. The opportunity here, he's flex worthy at the least, and so this is an opportunity for you to start him, get him in your lineup. He's going to get you 10 plus points. It's my not so obvious lock for week 7. All right, guys, this was a quick episode. We had no Bruce today. It's okay. It's okay. We still got to the content. We still got to the advice. We still got to the information needed. And it happens this way sometimes. So it's fine. Hopefully he'll be back next week. He was on earlier in the week if you listen to the first episode this week. So you still got your dose of Bruce. But good luck in week 7, everyone. To those watching on YouTube, if you haven't already done it, please hit the subscribe button. Like this video, turn on your notifications. I don't want you to miss any episodes. You can also drop in the comments below who's your not so obvious lock for week 7. I'm curious, who the community is thinking about, who the Rival community out here is, who they're digging for week 7 to get 10 plus points. Remember, it's got to be 10 plus points. To those listening on your favorite podcast apps, tap the subscribe button if you haven't already. If you're on Apple Podcasts, we'd love if you could leave us a quick review. Let us know why you like the show, what's your favorite, what you want to hear more about. Do all those good things. It also helps new listeners find the show. They see, number 1, all the reviews. Number 2, are they good reviews? And if you leave it, we appreciate that a lot. You can always find us on Twitter, IG at Rival Fantasy, or on TikTok at Play Rival Fantasy. If you follow us on there, let us know so we know that you're a listener of the show. We'll make sure that we follow you back. If you don't tell us that, we may not follow you back because we may not catch it. We may not notice it. It brings attention to it for us. So please let us know. We'll be sure to follow you back. That is it for today's show, guys. I am Neal. This is the Rival Podcast, and we are out.